August 19th, 1944. At Wehrmacht headquarters in East Prussia, General Alfred Jodl studied the latest reports from the collapsing Western Front. His staff had done the math. The Allies were pushing 400 miles beyond the Normandy beaches, stretching their supply lines thin as Patton's Third Army drove forward. The conclusion seemed obvious. Patton had outrun his fuel. No army could move at such speed without gasoline. From Hitler's Wolfschanz headquarters, Jodl calculated like any experienced general. An armored division burned through 150,000 gallons of fuel each day. With the Americans so far from their depots, their advance had to stop. He was sure Patton's tanks would soon grind to a halt, giving the Germans precious time to regroup along the Seine and maybe hold out until winter. What Jodl didn't know was that, just 125 miles away, nearly 6,000 trucks were already roaring east in a non-stop convoy. Their headlights cut through the night, ignoring all doctrine, carrying over 12,000 tons of supplies every single day. This was the Red Ball Express, a supply operation so daring that German planners had never imagined it possible. Within 72 hours, Patton's out of gas, tanks would smash through German defenses on the Seine. Within a week, they would liberate Paris. Within a month, they would be standing at Germany's border. The Wehrmacht's best generals were about to learn a lesson in American logistics that would change the way they thought about modern war. It would be delivered by 23,000 truck drivers, 3 out of every 4 of them African American, who turned a simple one-way highway system into the most efficient supply line in military history. German confidence in America's looming failure came from both their own brilliance and bitter experience. They had invented blitzkrieg, mastered combined arms warfare, and knew all too well the crushing limits of supply lines. Time and again, German offensives had collapsed not because of enemy strength, but because logistics couldn't keep up. In Russia, the Wehrmacht had raced forward only to stall when supplies couldn't cross the vast distances. Trucks broke down on bad roads. Horse-drawn wagons, still 80% of their transport, lagged far behind the panzers. Different railway gauges meant supplies piled up hundreds of miles from the front. General Heinrich von Luttwitz, set to lead the 47th Panzer Corps in September 1944, wrote in July, "The Americans face the same impossibility we faced in Russia. Their machines need fuel, ammunition, parts. They've advanced 400 miles in 30 days. History tells us what comes next: paralysis." German intelligence tracked every gallon, every shell, every ration. A single Sherman tank burned half a mile's worth of fuel per gallon on roads, far worse cross-country. An infantry division consumed 700 tons of supplies a day, an armored division 1,000 tons. Patton had 12 divisions pushing forward on a 60-mile front. That meant 12,000 tons every single day, hauled 400 miles from the beaches over wrecked roads through a transport system the Germans had sabotaged during their retreat. On August 20th, General Major Siegfried Westphal, soon to be Chief of Staff to Field Marshal von Rundstedt, wrote with certainty, "Even if the Americans had unlimited trucks, which they don't, and perfect roads, which they don't, and no mechanical failures, which is impossible, they still cannot keep Patton moving more than 48 hours. Physical laws cannot be violated, not even by American industry." But just 5 days later, at 2 p.m. on August 25th, in a requisitioned French chateau near Le Mans, Lieutenant Colonel Laurent Ayres of the Motor Transport Service stood before a room of skeptical officers. The numbers on the board were brutal. Patton's Third Army was burning through supplies faster than any force in history, advancing at speeds no logistical plan had ever imagined possible. Traditional supply methods, railways, scheduled convoys, depot distribution, had collapsed under the pressure. So Lieutenant Colonel Ayres told the officers in the room, "We're going to create a one-way highway from Cherbourg and the beaches straight to the front. Every truck will run 20 out of every 24 hours. No stops except for gas or emergencies. We'll move at least 12,500 tons a day." The name came from railroad slang. A Red Ball freight was an express shipment that got top priority. This Red Ball Express would work the same way. Absolute priority, no delays, no exceptions. The plan broke every rule in German doctrine. 2 parallel one-way highways. One for loaded trucks heading forward, one for empty trucks heading back. Around-the-clock driving, headlights on even at night, ignoring blackout rules. No stopping except for fuel or breakdowns. Convoys leaving every 5 minutes, holding 35 miles per hour average. Mobile repair crews every 50 miles. Military police checkpoints pulling out any truck going under 25 miles per hour. Colonel Charles O. Thrasher, commanding the advanced section, studied the numbers. We need 140 truck companies, nearly 6,000 vehicles, running at 90% availability. Every textbook said that was impossible. Yet within 36 hours, the impossible was real. On August 26, 1944, drivers of the 3,916th Quartermaster Truck Company climbed into their GMC, deuce and a half trucks, loaded with artillery shells bound for Patton's guns 300 miles east. The makeup of the Red Ball Express would have shocked Nazi racial theorists. Of the 23,000 drivers, 3 out of every 4 were African American, serving in a still segregated army. Men who couldn't eat in white restaurants or use white facilities back home were now keeping America's most famous generals moving forward. The drivers built their own culture almost instantly. They painted slogans on their trucks: Patton's Blood Bank, Hitler, Here We Come, Detroit to Berlin Express. They made their own rules too. Slower trucks pulled off at once, broken down vehicles were shoved into ditches, and anything under 20 miles per hour was considered a roadblock. By August 28th, German reconnaissance spotted something they had never seen before. Units reported from hills overlooking the route. Continuous column of vehicles, headlights visible for 20 kilometers. No spacing. No blackout. Estimate 1,000 vehicles per hour. Americans have abandoned all military precautions. To the Germans, it looked insane. Headlights at night invited airstrikes. Long, unbroken convoys were perfect artillery targets. One stalled truck could block hundreds. Yet the Americans didn't seem to care. On August 30th, General Lieutenant Edgar Feuchtinger of the 21st Panzer Division watched the Red Ball Express himself. His report to Army Group B admitted the unthinkable. The enemy operates a supply system beyond our comprehension. Vehicles pass every 30 seconds, day and night, without pause. They do not hide, do not disperse, do not follow any rules we understand. This is not military science. It was mass production applied to war. What the Germans never grasped was that American logistics worked on entirely different principles. Where German doctrine demanded concealment, Americans counted on overwhelming volume. Where Germans tried to conserve every vehicle, Americans assumed 20% would break down and planned for it. Where Germans stuck to procedure, Americans improvised on the move. The numbers from the Red Ball Express shattered every German calculation of what was possible. In the first week, August 25th to 31st, 1944, it delivered 89,939 tons of supplies. That was an average of 12,848 tons a day. The round trip covered 686 miles. Nearly 6,000 trucks made 1.5 trips daily. The operation itself consumed 300,000 gallons of fuel. German intelligence officers captured these figures from American documents and laughed them off as propaganda. But the numbers were real and growing. By September 5th, the Red Ball Express was running with a rhythm German officers couldn't believe, especially since 80% of their own supply system still relied on horses. Every 5 minutes, convoys rolled out from the western terminus. Each convoy averaged 67 trucks. Each truck carried 5 tons standard, often overloaded to 7. One-way distance, 350 miles. Time to cover it, 14 hours. Turnaround at each end, 2 hours. At any moment, 5,000 trucks were on the road. The system created innovations by the hour as drivers and mechanics solved problems German planners thought impossible. About 1,800 trucks broke down daily. Mobile repair crews fixed them on the roadside. They used a triage rule, 15 minutes to repair or push it aside. Parts were stripped from wrecks. Engines were swapped in 45 minutes with mobile cranes. If roads jammed, drivers carved alternate routes. They grabbed French buses to haul troops, freeing trucks for cargo. They even pressed captured German trucks into service, painted them olive drab, and kept rolling. When bridges were gone, they built bypasses with rubble from bombed-out towns. To German observers, it looked like chaos, but it worked. Their doctrine valued careful planning, scheduled maintenance, and proper procedure. The Americans broke every rule, yet the system didn't collapse. It sped up. What stunned the Germans most was American fuel. The Red Ball Express drank 300,000 gallons of gasoline a day just to run itself, more than many German armies got for all operations. Yet fuel never ran out. That was because the Americans had built another miracle, Operation Pluto, fuel pipelines laid under the English Channel. By September 1944, fuel was flowing through pipes the Germans didn't even know existed. Along the Red Ball route, forward fuel dumps stood every 25 miles. Tanker trucks ran their own convoys, so no driver waited more than 10 minutes to refuel. General Major Walter Warlimont, looking at aerial photos, could only shake his head. The Americans have fuel dumps larger than our entire reserves. They burn more gasoline-moving gasoline than we allocate to whole panzer divisions. This isn't war as we know it. It's industrial overflow. The Red Ball Express didn't just supply Patton's advance. It multiplied it. German doctrine taught that an armored division could advance 20 to 30 miles a day under perfect conditions. Patton's divisions, supplied by the Red Ball, went far beyond that. With the Red Ball Express behind them, Patton's forces averaged 40 to 60 miles of advance per day, week after week. On September 1, 1944, the 4th Armored Division pushed 35 miles in the morning, paused at noon to refuel and reload. Red Ball trucks were already there waiting. By afternoon, the division surged another 32 miles forward. A single day's 67-mile advance demolished German planning, which had assumed no army could move more than 30 miles in one day. In East Prussia, General Oberst Heinz Guderian refused to believe the reports. No armored force can advance 60 miles a day for a week. Mechanical failures alone would stop it. This must be propaganda or misreporting. But American radio traffic, intercepted in the clear, confirmed it. More unsettling to German commanders, the Americans weren't even bothering to encrypt. They were so confident they could outrun any German response. By September 5th, German intelligence had compiled full reports on the Red Ball Express. The implications were catastrophic. Every assumption about American limits was wrong. The reports noted things that defied German military science. Americans wasted trucks freely, abandoning them on the roadside instead of repairing them. Drivers stayed awake for days on stimulants, violating every principle of manpower management. They ignored camouflage and blackout discipline, running in plain sight, yet no air attacks came. Mechanical failures hit 30% daily, but sheer redundancy crushed the problem. Fuel use was staggering, enough to bankrupt any European army, but somehow the Americans never ran dry. Field Marshal Walter Model's reaction captured the growing despair. If these reports are true, we face not just a stronger army, but a stronger civilization. They do not hide because they do not fear us. They waste resources because they have endless resources. We cannot defeat this with tactics. The price was real, though unseen by German eyes. Red Ball drivers often went 72 hours without sleep, hallucinating from exhaustion and benzodrine. Crashes killed 300 men during the operation. Trucks colliding in fog, rolling off damaged roads, or bursting into flames when overheated engines caught fire. Yet morale stayed remarkably high. Most of these drivers were African American, men denied equal rights at home, but they knew they were making history. Every mile driven, every ton delivered, was proof that Hitler's racial theories were a lie. Captured German officers admitted it openly. Oberst Hans von Luck, taken prisoner in September 1944, told his interrogators, "We knew we had lost when we understood your supply system. You broke every rule. Waste fuel, abandon vehicles, exhaust drivers, yet succeed through sheer volume. You've industrialized warfare beyond our comprehension." The psychological impact on German troops was crushing. Wehrmacht soldiers lay awake at night listening to the roar of American trucks, mile after mile, hour after hour. Endless motors meant endless supplies. They had 3 bullets per rifle while the Americans were hauling in millions. The sound itself became a weapon, psychological warfare delivered through engines in the dark. The trucks themselves stunned German engineers. The GMC CCKW 2.5-ton, backbone of the Red Ball Express, was mass production perfection. By war's end, General Motors had built more than 500,000 of them, more trucks than the entire German military owned of all kinds combined. Each was packed with innovations the Germans had never standardized. All-wheel drive as routine, automatic tire inflation, waterproofing that allowed them to ford 30 inches of water, engines that ran on poor-quality fuel without modification, even heaters that worked in winter. But it wasn't just design, it was philosophy. Germans rebuilt engines, Americans swapped them out. Germans rationed parts, Americans junked whole vehicles for minor issues. Germans relied on master mechanics. Americans trained thousands of competent mechanics who could handle most repairs on the spot. As the front pushed east, the Red Ball Express adapted with a speed that left German planners dumbfounded. When the route to Chartres couldn't handle the load, the Americans spun up new express lines almost overnight. White Ball Express from Rouen to Paris. Green Diamond from Cherbourg to Railheads. Red Lion from Bayeux to Brussels. ABC Line from Antwerp to Charleroi. Each was up and running within 48 hours. German staff officers took weeks to plan operations half as complex. The Americans just painted new markers, assigned trucks, and rolled forward. And at the heart of it all were African-American drivers. Nazi ideology declared them inferior, incapable of discipline or technical skill. Yet these men were pulling off logistics feats the Germans couldn't dream of. The irony wasn't lost on the drivers. They knew exactly what Hitler thought of them, and it only made them drive harder. Every mile was proof he was wrong. They were fighting racism with truck keys, crushing Nazi ideology through performance. Some German POWs, forced to load Red Ball trucks as laborers, found their worldview shattered. They worked under African-American sergeants who calculated cargo weights faster than German engineers, spoke better English than their instructors, and treated them more fairly than Nazi propaganda had ever suggested possible. The Red Ball Express demanded infrastructure the Germans considered impossible under combat conditions. Yet the Americans built it, expanded it, and kept it running without pause. Engineers built or reinforced 40 bridges, created 15 major fuel depots, set up 26 maintenance stations, and even constructed 8 temporary cities for the drivers, all while the Red Ball Express was already running. The bridge at Mantes, blown up by German engineers to cripple American logistics, was expected to take at least 6 weeks to replace. American engineers built a temporary bridge in just 14 hours, while convoys lost only 8 miles to a hastily bulldozed bypass. German engineers watched in disbelief. No long planning meetings, no detailed blueprints, just action. The Americans built faster than the Germans could destroy, throwing up infrastructure that seemed to appear overnight in French fields. One achievement shocked German artillery officers most: ammunition supply at levels beyond their highest theoretical limits. American artillery fired without restriction, a luxury German gunners hadn't enjoyed since 1942. During the battle for Metz in September 1944, the XX Corps artillery fired 100,000 rounds in just 24 hours. The Red Ball Express delivered every shell, and 20% more. Meanwhile, German batteries around Metz were rationed to just 50 rounds per gun per day. The imbalance was staggering. American guns thundered for hours while German officers calculated that such fire required 50 truckloads of shells per hour. Somehow, the Red Ball provided it without pause. The system devoured vehicles at a pace that would have crippled any other army. By late September, mechanical attrition was staggering. Average truck life only 10,000 miles instead of 30,000, daily breakdown rates of 30%, 500 engines replaced weekly, 10,000 tires consumed weekly, and more than 5,000 vehicles destroyed or abandoned. Yet the operation never slowed. American industry had already planned for it. Every week, new ships docked in France loaded with fresh trucks. New drivers were trained in 2 days and sent straight into convoys. German intelligence calculated that the Americans were losing more trucks weekly than the Wehrmacht even possessed in France. Yet American transport capacity only grew. They had done the impossible. Logistics faster than consumption. For the French people, the impact was unforgettable. Civilians along the Red Ball route saw American abundance replace years of German scarcity. Drivers, many of them African American, often shared rations despite regulations. At every stop, children gathered, and drivers handed out chocolate, cigarettes, even soap. The contrast with German occupation was brutal. Americans gave away casually what Germans had rationed strictly. German intelligence reported the effect. French civilians now believe American victory inevitable. They cite the truck convoys as proof. Resistance activity has increased 400% along Red Ball routes. Populations that once accepted our occupation now openly oppose it. But in early September 1944, the Red Ball Express faced its toughest challenge yet. Patton's Third Army had pushed so far forward that even this miracle supply line strained to keep pace. The round trip was now over 700 miles, and drivers were. The Red Ball Express began to collapse under its own weight. Vehicles were breaking down, and German intelligence quickly noticed the strain. On September 8th, General der Panzertruppen Hass von Manschafel reported, American supply lines show signs of collapse. Convoy intervals have increased from 5 to 15 minutes. Vehicle speed has decreased. This is our opportunity. But once again, American adaptability shocked the Germans. Within 72 hours, the Red Ball Express reorganized itself. They built transfer points in the middle of routes, cutting runs to just 350 miles. They rotated drivers to keep them fresh, set up forward repair depots, and doubled the number of trucks. By September 12th, deliveries had not only recovered, they had actually increased. A crisis that should have stopped Patton's advance only made the system stronger. And the Americans had another surprise: large-scale aerial supply. Using C-47 transport planes, they began flying 3 tons of supplies per aircraft directly to the front. On September 16, 1944, German observers counted 900 flights in one day, 2,700 tons delivered from the air. At Stalingrad, the Luftwaffe at its peak had barely managed 300 tons per day and called it their maximum effort. The Americans treated transport planes like flying trucks. No fighter escorts, no worries about fuel shortages. They accepted losses and simply overwhelmed the problem with numbers. The Wehrmacht couldn't compete with this kind of industrial power. What baffled the Germans even more was how the Red Ball Express was run. Junior officers made decisions that in the Wehrmacht were reserved for generals. Sergeants commanded operations larger than those run by German colonels. Every lieutenant acted like a general, every sergeant like a colonel. To German eyes, it looked like chaos. But it worked, and worked with an efficiency the rigid German hierarchy couldn't match. By October 1944, railroads began to take over as the main supply system, reducing the Red Ball's load. What had been planned as a 10-day emergency operation had lasted 82 days. In that time, the Red Ball Express delivered 412,000 tons of supplies across 122 million ton-miles. German commanders, now fighting on their own soil, understood what they had witnessed. Field Marshal Model admitted in his final report, "We were not defeated by American tanks or planes primarily. We were defeated by American trucks." The transition to rail was itself a miracle. American railroad engineers rebuilt 1,000 miles of destroyed French track while the Red Ball Express was still running. They laid new rail faster than Germans could sabotage it, often using captured German equipment. The final statistics stunned even the Allies. 82 days of continuous operation, 412,193 tons of supplies delivered, 122 million ton-miles traveled, average of 5,958 vehicles in use, with a peak of 7,000, 23,000 drivers employed, 700,000 gallons of fuel consumed daily, 40,000 tires used. The Red Ball Express had done the impossible. It proved that in modern war, logistics wasn't just support, it was strategy. The Red Ball Express delivered staggering numbers. Tons of ammunition for Patton, 15 million rations, and 135,000 tons of medical supplies. When captured German officers later reviewed these figures, they admitted they had miscalculated American logistics. They had assumed U.S. capacity was at most 3 times greater than their own. In reality, America was 10 times stronger. But beyond numbers, the Red Ball Express did something far deeper. It shattered German faith in their own military superiority. Officers who had mocked Americans as soft and dependent on machines now watched them perform supply miracles with grit and overwhelming industry. Prisoners of war stood silently at camp fences, counting the endless trucks. Some wept. They realized the truth. Not only could the Americans supply their armies, they could waste more than Germany could ever produce. Their worldview was collapsing, one truck at a time. The Red Ball Express also forced America to face its own contradictions. The operation relied overwhelmingly on African American soldiers, men who were segregated, denied equal treatment, and barred from combat. In September 1944, General Eisenhower visited the Red Ball and saw this reality himself. His aide, Captain Harry Butcher, recorded, "The general stood watching black drivers who'd been at it for 20 hours straight. He said, 'These men are winning the war as surely as any infantry. We need to reconsider many things.' Their success created pressure that helped lead to desegregation in the U.S. military. 3 years later, the proof was undeniable. African American soldiers had shown in France what they always knew. Given the tools and the chance, they could match anyone. The Red Ball was their battlefield, and they won it. German racial theorists had no answer. SS journals stopped mentioning American logistics altogether. The evidence was too strong, too humiliating to explain away. After the war, German engineers studied the Red Ball Express intensely, and its lessons reshaped military logistics worldwide. Sheer volume beats inefficiency, redundancy removes vulnerability, and decentralization creates speed. Standardization multiplies power. Human endurance has limits, but they're far higher than anyone thought. In 1950, General Franz Halder, former chief of the German General Staff, admitted, "The Red Ball Express proved that logistics determines strategy, not the other way around." Americans understood this. We learned it too late. Within the 23,000 Red Ball drivers, stories of heroism emerged that German officers couldn't even process within their military mindset. These accounts were confirmed in official records. Corporal John L. Houston drove for 48 straight hours, hauling ammunition to the 2nd Armored Division at Cambrai, falling asleep at the wheel 3 times but revived by fellow drivers and pushing on. Private Booker T. Washington's truck caught fire from overheated brakes while loaded with medical supplies. Instead of abandoning it, as regulations demanded, he drove the burning vehicle 2 miles to a field hospital, jumping clear just as the flames reached the cab. His delivery saved the lives of wounded soldiers from both sides. Stories like these, repeated thousands of times, revealed to the Germans an American military culture they couldn't replicate. Individual initiative, risk-taking, and mission success above rigid rules. In desperation, the Germans tried to copy the Red Ball Express in late 1944. During the Battle of the Bulge, Operation Greif planned to use captured American trucks for German supply lines. The effort collapsed almost immediately. German drivers couldn't match American speed. Their mechanics couldn't fix U.S. vehicles fast enough. Their fuel stocks couldn't handle the consumption. Most of all, Germans lacked the American mindset of treating resources as limitless. Colonel Obstany, commanding the effort, reported, "We captured 50 American trucks. Within a week, 30 were deadlined. Americans would have replaced them. We tried to repair them. That difference explains our defeat." Then came the winter of 1944 to 45. Freezing rain, snow, and ice should have ended all truck movement. German doctrine said wheeled transport became impossible below -10 degrees Celsius. Yet the Red Ball Express rolled on. Drivers chained their tires, poured alcohol into radiators, and kept moving. Speeds dropped from 35 to 15 miles per hour, but the tonnage kept flowing. German observers were stunned to see convoys moving through blizzards that had already stopped panzer divisions. By this point, it was clear. The Americans had created a logistics system that ignored weather, terrain, even the enemy. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't efficient, but it was unstoppable. In May 1945, captured German logistics officers were ordered to study the Red Ball Express for the historical record. Their conclusions cut deep into German pride. General der Infanterie Friedrich Schulz admitted, "The Red Ball Express represents a kind of warfare we never imagined. The Americans built a temporary civilization, thousands of men, thousands of vehicles, millions of tons of supplies, that existed only to feed their armies, then dissolved when no longer needed. We spent years building permanent infrastructure. They built superior temporary systems in days." The most insightful judgment came from General Heinz Guderian, the father of German armored warfare. "We invented blitzkrieg, but we never solved its greatest weakness, logistics. The Americans did, through industrial power we thought impossible." The Red Ball Express wasn't just a supply line. It was a river of material that drowned our armies. The cost to the U.S. in 1944 was about $100 million. Trucks destroyed, fuel burned, roads torn up, French damage claims. German staff officers, trained to manage scarcity, couldn't even grasp the number. But Americans called it cheap. Why? Because that river of trucks captured 400,000 German soldiers, liberated France, Belgium, and Luxembourg, and shortened the war by at least 6 months. Every day of war cost America $250 million. By that math, the Red Ball Express paid for itself in a single day. Lieutenant General John C.H. Lee, in charge of logistics for the European theater, put it bluntly, "We wore out 5,000 trucks and 23,000 men to destroy the German army in France. In any previous war, That would be catastrophic losses. In an American industrial war, it's acceptable overhead. The Red Ball Express had another consequence no one expected. It changed post-war civilian logistics forever. Thousands of drivers came home with experience running the largest transport system in the world. They used it to build trucking companies, design the interstate highway system, and create modern American logistics. Companies like Yellow Freight, Roadway, and Consolidated Freightways were founded by Red Ball veterans, men who turned wartime trucking into the backbone of U.S. commerce. In France, the Americans learned that volume beats efficiency, speed beats perfection, and if you can keep trucks rolling 24 hours a day, you can move the world. Historians agree, the Red Ball Express was the decisive logistics operation of the European theater. Without it, Patton's advance would have stalled, Paris would have fallen weeks later, and German forces would have built strong winter defenses. The operation proved the American doctrine that logistics mattered more than tactics. While German officers studied Clausewitz and battlefield maneuvers, Americans studied Detroit assembly lines and railroad timetables. The Red Ball Express showed that in modern war, supply decides victory more than battlefield brilliance. On September 15, 1944, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, the German commander in the West, received a full intelligence report on the Red Ball Express. After hours of study, he told his staff, "Gentlemen, this is beyond a military solution. The Americans have built a supply system that makes distance meaningless. Our strategy assumed their advance would collapse when they outran supplies. That point doesn't exist. They have changed warfare. We are fighting the last war." His operations officer, Hans Speidel, suggested striking the Red Ball routes with the remaining Luftwaffe. Rundstedt's answer showed the hopelessness. "With what shall we interdict? They have 6,000 trucks. If we destroy 1,000, which we cannot, they'll replace them in a week. We'd need to destroy 200 a day just to match their production. We don't even have 200 aircraft." Behind those numbers were human stories that stunned German observers. Drivers who hadn't slept for 3 days refused relief, afraid their trucks might not make it without them. Mechanics worked in freezing rain to keep convoys moving. Teenagers lied about their age just to drive. These stories spread, building a kind of mythology that crushed German morale. The Americans, they realized, were not soft as Nazi propaganda had claimed. They pushed themselves harder than Germans ever drove horses. But they did it by choice, not out of fear. That made them more dangerous than German doctrine had ever imagined. The Red Ball Express became a kind of propaganda more powerful than anything deliberately planned. German soldiers could hear the convoys at night, endless engines that never seemed to stop. The sound alone became psychological warfare. Some units even reported hearing ghost convoys, phantom engines rumbling in their minds, which demoralized them as much as real supply lines. The knowledge that Americans had unlimited fuel and ammunition, while Germans rationed their last bullets, spread despair across the Wehrmacht. American psychological warfare units recognized this. They even began broadcasting recordings of truck engines toward German lines when no convoys were present. German troops reported them as real, proof of the deep psychological wound the Red Ball had left. In November 1944, once rail lines were restored, the Red Ball Express was officially shut down. But its methods had already changed warfare forever. Continuous, high-volume supply, wasteful maybe but unstoppable, became the foundation of American military doctrine. The final shock came with how fast it all disappeared. In just 72 hours, 23,000 men, 6,000 vehicles, and hundreds of installations were dissolved. Troops reassigned, trucks redistributed, roads returned to civilian use. Germans, by comparison, took months to build smaller operations and years to dismantle them. Americans built what they needed, used it, scrapped it, and moved on to something bigger. When German generals surrendered in May 1945, many pointed to the Red Ball Express as proof the war was unwinnable. General der Panzertruppe Otto von Manschufel admitted during interrogation, "When we understood your logistics capacity, we knew the war was lost. You could supply armies faster than we could destroy them. The Red Ball Express was a weapon we had no defense against." Field Marshal Albert Kessler, one of Germany's sharpest commanders, was once asked what surprised him most about the Americans. His answer was simple: "Not your tanks, not your planes, your trucks." The Red Ball Express had shown him that America had turned its entire society into a war machine. Germany wasn't just fighting U.S. soldiers. It was fighting U.S. factories. The numbers tell the story. The Red Ball Express delivered 412,193 tons of cargo. It covered 122 million ton-miles. It ran 5,958 trucks daily, peaking at 7,000. It required 23,000 drivers. In 82 days of operation, it burned 57 million gallons of fuel, wore out 180,000 tires, destroyed more than 5,000 vehicles, and cost $100 million. With that effort, it defeated 47 German divisions and shortened the war by 6 months. These weren't just statistics, they marked the moment warfare changed forever. From then on, industrial capacity mattered more than battlefield genius. Logistics didn't just serve strategy, logistics became strategy. In 1994, on the 50th anniversary of D-Day, the U.S. Postal Service issued a stamp honoring the Red Ball Express at the National Postal Museum in Washington, D.C. It was recognition long overdue. The veterans who attended remembered the pride of what they had done. They had driven through exhaustion, breakdowns, and weather that even tanks couldn't handle. Most were black soldiers, segregated, discriminated against, denied credit during the war. Yet they had delivered victory at 35 miles per hour. The Red Ball Express proved a simple truth. In modern war, logistics isn't support, it's the main effort. It showed that a democracy with massive industry could outproduce and outsupply any dictatorship. German generals who once mocked American logistics were silenced by the reality of 6,000 trucks carrying 12,500 tons a day across 700 miles of liberated France. They had assumed Americans would follow Europe's old rules of conserving resources. Instead, America rewrote the rules of war. The Germans expected the Allies to advance slowly and carefully. Instead, the Americans unleashed a logistics tsunami that drowned them in supplies. The Red Ball Express didn't succeed because of some brilliant military trick. It succeeded because of qualities the Germans never understood. America's industrial abundance, mechanical know-how, improvisation, and above all, the initiative of ordinary soldiers making decisions on the spot that, in the German army, would have required approval from a field marshal. General George S. Patton, whose Third Army thrived thanks to the Red Ball Express, gave the highest praise in his memoirs. The truck drivers of the Red Ball Express deserved as much credit for the defeat of Germany as any combat unit. They drove through exhaustion, through mechanical failure, through weather that stopped armor. Without them, the Third Army doesn't move. Without movement, we don't win. They were black soldiers, mostly segregated, discriminated against, denied recognition. But they won the war as surely as any rifleman. History must record this truth. And that truth is the Red Ball Express's final legacy. 23,000 mostly African-American drivers, running 6,000 trucks along a one-way highway to victory, achieved what German military science declared impossible. They delivered supplies faster than physics should have allowed. They kept armies moving beyond human limits. They proved that in modern war, the side with the most trucks beats the side with the best tactics. German generals once mocked American logistics as wasteful, sloppy, and unsustainable. But after 82 days, they surrendered to armies fueled by the Red Ball Express. They finally realized that American trucks had beaten German tanks, that industrial power had crushed military brilliance, and that logistics itself had become strategy. The Red Ball Express officially ended on November 16, 1944, but its impact stretched across history. It showed that in the industrial age, victory doesn't belong to the bravest soldier or the smartest general. It belongs to the nation that can move the most supplies, the farthest, the fastest. The German generals who sneered at American logistics in August 1944 were signing surrender papers by May 1945, defeated by 23,000 truck drivers who revolutionized war at 35 miles per hour. Their story belongs among the great operations of military history, not because it was pretty or efficient. It wasn't, but because it worked. The Red Ball Express kept Patton moving, kept the Germans retreating, and proved that in modern war, truck convoys matter more than tank columns. The highways of France still carry the scars, deep ruts carved by overloaded trucks, bridges patched on the fly, and wrecked vehicles rusting by the roadside. But the real monument to the Red Ball Express is the speed of Allied victory. Every day the war was shortened meant thousands of lives saved. The Red Ball Express cut months off the conflict. In the end, the German generals who once mocked American logistics learned the hardest lesson of modern warfare. Amateurs talk tactics, professionals talk logistics, and Americans talk trucks. The Red Ball Express was America talking loudly. 6,000 engines roaring nonstop, hauling both democracy and destruction at 35 miles per hour down a one-way road to victory. The final word belongs to a German officer whose name is lost to history. At the 1994 commemoration, a Red Ball veteran recalled his words. Standing by a Belgian road in 1944, watching the endless convoys roll past, the officer told his captors in accented English, "We prepared for everything. Your tanks, your planes, your ships. We never prepared for your trucks. How do you defeat an enemy who has more trucks than you have soldiers?" The answer rumbled past him every 5 minutes, driven by exhausted Americans who were rewriting the rules of war one delivery at a time. The Red Ball Express had turned logistics into strategy, supplies into victory, and trucks into the deadliest weapon of the European war. By the time the Germans understood this truth, Patton was already at their gates, fed, fueled, and unstoppable, thanks to the greatest logistics operation in history.